Salut! Je m'appelle Kat.
Et je m'appelle Gabe.
Et on est les Ghouls next door.
I did it.
Hey! Nous parlons en français pour notre épisode de horreur français. Merci d'avoir écouté notre série de films Le Horreur Étranger. So yeah, France.
Yeah.
Welcome to France. We kind of spoke some French. We did it. Thanks, high school. You let me do that for 4 years. Now I kind of know some stuff. I barely had to Google Translate this. I did so much just like out of my brain. It was like secretly in there, in my subconscious.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
That's nice. That was easy.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, this is
cool too.
our for English speakers. It is our series on foreign horror films.
Yes.
And today we're talking about French horror films.
Yeah.
Or specifically the
horror étranger.
the genre of New French Extremity. Because there's a lot to say about it. I like French horror films. I had only really watched them, and we talked about that in one of our episodes. And maybe like some other random, like not just horror films, but French films, right? But the ones we watch for this have interested me now. Now I'm just like, I do really want to like look at more. But as far as French goes, I am French, and that's all I have.
Yeah, I don't know why I went through a weird phase in college where I watched a lot of French horror films. I genuinely have I don't know why I did it. My friends wanted me to watch them, so I did. Yeah. And they were really graphic and upsetting, but I get it now. Yeah. After doing lots and lots of research on, all the scary stuff that just like happened in France.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like really interesting historical framework for why all of this is made the way that it is, and it was really cool. But yeah, I don't know why I took French, and I don't know why I took French in high school because I thought it was cool. And then I think because I knew a little bit of French, I was like, yeah, I can watch some French horror films. It's totally cool. We're in college. We're gonna watch foreign films. That's so like hip. Let's
Intellectual.
go. Yeah, we're so smart.
Yeah. So. How do you like them apples? Yeah, we I would say with this series it's really fun because you get to really, really see and explore horror when you're looking through another lens from like other countries, because they're so distinct. Like they have their style, they have their history, they have their like whole way. So it's like even just thinking like comparing it to Japanese, it's like so very, very different and unique. And I think that's super cool. And like in both ways, like both American influences these things and is influenced by them. Yeah. So I think like I'm having a really good time on this series so far.
I agree. And what's also just super cool is like so much history exists in the places that we're exploring that's like not to hate on America, but we have this like one of the shorter histories in terms of like written and like political otherwise. And it's just really interesting for like these countries with like such a wealth of long lasting cultural history, like languages, all stuff. It's just really cool. Yeah. How much it just clearly influences, and you just see it and it's fun.
Absolutely.
Get to use my degree today.
All month. Yeah, and I get to explore a new film and be in awe of like what these countries are up to, because it's really awesome. This is so cool. So stay tuned because it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, facts. We tell you facts. All the facts. Yeah, facts. Still facts. About that spooky stuff. Yeah, spooky stuff.
All right, y'all, let's get historical.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about some history.
Talk about that history stuff.
Yeah, it's totally that. So I guess what we're going to talk about today is when thinking about French horror cinema, it's hard to do so without considering the impact of the German occupation of France during the Holocaust and like World War II, the Vichy regime that exists within that, and then also the following the war, the Algerian War, and for independence from France. So it gets real messed up. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
So let's start with World War II. For context, the Vichy regime and the German occupation took place during the 1940s to 1944. The Vichy regime led to Marshal Philippe Pétain in rule, which he coined the French state following an armistice between Nazi Germany and France. Again, this is where it gets real messed up. So Pétain and Vichy regime willfully collaborated with the German occupation to a high degree. The French police and the state militia organized raids to capture Jews and others considered undesirables by the Germans in both the northern and southern zones of France. One zone of France was considered a free zone, so that's where it's like extra messed up because like that part technically wasn't even under German control, and they still just like sent off and murdered a lot of people. So this started to divide a lot of France, as you would expect it to, because it's like being impacted by war and then also like these atrocities that they're witnessing in front of them. So essentially, Pétain himself, after he was taken out of power, was sentenced to death for treason, but his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment after. We see the theme of undesirables and torture emerge heavy in French horror cinema further as it develops, and we'll see that a lot in the current French films that, we watch that are, I guess, like 30, 40 years ahead of their time.
Yeah. Wow.
But following that, it doesn't get better. Following the war, we begin to see a shift in French national identity following the liberation that combines guilt and redemption. Historian Henry Rousseau identifies this period between 1954 and 1971 as a period of resistentialism, where France collectively suffers through the idea of the Vichy syndrome, characterized as a diverse set of symptoms whereby the trauma of the occupation, and particularly the trauma resulting from internal divisions within France, which I argue takes hold fully during the Algerian War, reveal itself in political, social, and cultural life. So this ideology of, I hate this word, resistentialism.
Resistentialism.
Yes, started a process that sought to minimize the importance of the Vichy regime, so kind of just pretending it didn't happen. And there's like a weird long period of pretending it was not as bad as it was, not accepting that they actively participated in this. You'll see this in Germany too. But like kind of this doubt within what's good and what's bad, and if they are bad themselves.
Yeah.
So after the war, we see a lot of censorship start to emerge because obviously national morale is low.
Yeah.
So as they get into the Algerian War and Algerian people basically demanding independence from French colonization, they're censoring like all the awful things that are happening in Algeria. So essentially, France does not take any sort of break from the bloodshed and dives right in.
There's full of propaganda and stuff.
There's a lot of propaganda, a lot of bloody colonial conflict raged between 1954 and 1962. So during the years of the Algerian War, particularly during the 1950s and 60s, the French government exercised strict censorship policies in regard to the war's coverage. Articles and books critical of the war reporting acts of torture might be published, but were often seized or banned shortly after. And we started to really see this in like the government getting involved with what was being put in film. So essentially, creatives tried to fight against this through creating films that talked about the underlying theme that was happening throughout France, this whole idea of feeling guilty, wanting to redeem yourself, but then also this like idea of a split personality, like who am I now that I know that I've been a part of this like awful thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So yeah, we start to see the combination of guilt and redemption, and basically France trying to like struggle through what seems like the potential for another civil war threat. Because, there's rioting in Algeria, there's the aftermath of World War II, there were already conflict internally within the country that were happening prior to World War II that just like had to be put to the side because more crazy things were happening that like they just couldn't deal with that. They just had to like be like, all right, I guess this is fine.
Yeah, we have
this
to
is
keep
the
going.
lesser of the importance because invasion. So like we're gonna put this to the side, and then like that really erupted after like everything kind of calmed down after World War II. But you kind of see this obsession with like the fact that there was so much torture that happened during the Algerian War, as well as just like military medical experiments and like the atrocities of the Holocaust. There becomes this like fascination with like the body, it being like ripped open, torn apart, torture, that kind of stuff, and like how it affects the psyche.
Yikes on bikes.
So as we start to like get past that, the films we start to see emerging in post-war France, highlighted in the fight against this censorship and the conflict of French identity during the time, really shows this desire for redemption, but also like this really big conflict with guilt. We won't be talking about this film in our film section, but the filmmaker Georges Franju, his films are an excellent example of this connection, and they honestly connect really heavily with our modern films that we watched for our episode. He was challenged with the censorship and like actually really had to fight to get his message across without blatantly saying it was about Algeria or World War II.
Yeah. What was his film?
Les Yeux en Village, which Eyes Without a Face.
Eyes Without a Face.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So he basically used this film as a way to bring like the realness of what was happening and the shocking recognition of history's horrors within the fabric of everyday life. So his film Eyes Without a Face focuses heavily on the themes of redemption and guilt, as well as tying the horrors of military medical experiments, torture, and the identity of like French trauma. So we see this also later in Martyrs, where you have like them trying to reach this greater goal that ultimately does not matter.
Yeah.
In Eyes Without a Face, the dad's just trying to redeem himself for the accident that he caused for his daughter. And he's at the end of it, no one feels better.
Yeah.
And
he's
so
only
essentially
making a bigger mess of it too, which is kind of exactly like what the French were doing with being like, let's ignore the initial problem and don't heal, and instead just cause more trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. So we honestly, like in the film, the daughter, Christine, when she sees her reflection in the mirror, to recognize both herself and the dead she is responsible for in the creation of her disfigured face, echoes the words of Jean-Paul Sartre, that writes in 1958, which is before the movie, so you could argue that they influence each other. During the war, we watched the German soldiers walking inoffensively down the street. We would say to ourselves, they look like us. How can they act as they do? And we were proud of ourselves for not understanding. But now we raise our heads and look in the mirror, we see an unfamiliar and hideous reflection of ourselves. So the conflict of the split identity, the realities of like, for them to still be here, of all the things that have been like done by their national identity, like their country has done this thing, and they have to figure out what that means for who they are, and that they didn't stop it.
Yeah.
Or even just thought that they weren't involved with it, but like a lot of people were.
Yeah.
There was like this whole purge that happened after, which is a whole other can of worms. It's just like real crazy, definitely in the verge of like McCarthyism, where they're taking intellectuals and stuff.
Yeah.
It's real intense.
Yeah.
But
like,
we start to see that again in like the movies we watched, like Martyrs. We see that with like the whole theme of the undesirables. We have the torture, and even High Tension. You have that split personality kind of dynamic going on. So like really not seeing yourself as the monster.
Yeah.
Until later, and you're just like, wow.
Yeah, and you need to like disassociate so that you can handle the trauma.
Yeah, and even I'd argue in Raw, we see it a little bit in that like you're doing what I guess the general population would consider horrible things, but you're still having to live a normal life.
Yeah.
And how can you, considering like what the reality is of who you are? So what we see throughout French cinema are references to post-traumatic culture, the wound culture structured around public fascination with torn and open bodies and torn and open persons, indicating an overlap between personal identity and natural identity. So essentially it's just saying historical trauma is real. It affects who you are as a person, as a citizen of said place, and is especially shown in French media and cinema. And we'll be talking a lot about that today.
Yeah, so that's our whole thing.
That's my spiel. A lot of messed up stuff happened in France, guys. It was bad.
Yeah.
And they're really trying to process it.
Yeah.
is what I got from all of this.
Yeah, and then what better way to do it than through horror, which, you know, we've said before is an outlet for, like, being able to get away with, like, away from censorship, right? It's like we are under the radar and we can say more usually because they're not being as watched, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what we've been saying. Is that
whole
the media
time.
means something.
Yeah. And it's just like really interesting to see, like, after reading all of that, like how prevalent it is in the films that we watch, where I'm just like, oh my God, that's like the whole thing.
Yeah.
The whole thing is this. This makes so much sense. It's like 40 years later and it's still so much of a thing.
Yeah.
A little more than 40 years, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was long enough ago, but not, like, there are still people alive who've experienced that are relatives of the people making this new media.
Yeah.
Who are like, this is still very much a part of who we are.
Yeah.
So,
That's
cool.
awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, education. Did
did
you guys
so much
enjoy
smarts,
that
guys.
trip down memory lane, which was the horror lane of memories? Yeah. Well, so as we do is we connect, you know, the cultural ramifications or the cultural background with its influence to the media that we're watching, right? Like, because everything is made for a reason. It's not just like, this is for fun. Like, even things that are just for fun are fun for a reason, right?
Unless you hide people in your basement and you're torturing them to figure out if stuff exists.
Yeah,
then it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, but you still made a film about it, so then it matters a little bit. Yeah.
I'm making jokes you don't understand. It's totally fine.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Gabe.
we'll get there. Yeah, but like these horrors, like that Kat was explaining, right, that are reflecting in this society are directly influencing the media, right? It's their way of coping with this. It's their way of like getting the information out, and also like looking at themselves, like putting that mirror up and being able to look at it and be like, this is what we are. This is what we did. This is what we survived as well, right? We all have scars.
Yeah.
And how are we going to do that, right? So the trauma of this history is a reflection of a lot of French film in general, but specifically in what we're going to be diving into today would be the genre that is dubbed New French Extremity, which serves kind of as a mirror for a culture that is both tormented by outside forces and their own identities, like you were saying, right? It's like there are physical, actual enemies out here, but there's also like internal enemies within ourselves that we're like fighting. And a film can be categorized in this movement if it deals with body horror, sexual decadence, and or sexual like violence, sexist violence, psychosis, severe violence, or human suffering, which is like a classic horror like trope, is just to feature these traumatizing things. And while these qualifiers are very sweeping and sometimes hard to pin down, the movement itself lies on the crossroads of like art house, body horror, and the exploitation film. So it's like this weird kind of mashup. Like a lot of it, when I was doing research for this, Giallo, I hope I'm saying that correctly, that's the Italian horror film, or like Italian art house horror film, which we will be exploring for this series, was mentioned a lot. But that's heavily art house. And then you also have something which I would say like American cinema is very exploitative. And it's just like, look at this awful stuff. Like, we can do it. Like, who cares about the system, right? Whereas like this is this almost like respectful attention to gore and to body horror and to trauma, but still doing that. So it's like, it's artistic, but it's also traumatizing on screen, which is such a weird thing to experience when you're like feeling uncomfortable because of like the graphic nature, but you're also sitting there thinking like, wait, I also feel things. Like, I'm not just like grossed out.
I think it like takes a step away from that torture porn thing, and that like you're not enjoying yourself, but at the same time you feel like positive about the experience of watching what you're watching.
Yeah, you feel like
it means something.
Yeah, it was on purpose. You're not just like, oh, I was just being gross for a minute, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, so James Quant was a critic for the art magazine Art Forum, and he's the one who coined the term New French Extremity. And he did this after watching the film 29 Palms and was like, he was incredibly angered by like the very cavalier way that the film handled like gore and violence. Like he thought it was very excessive, and it was like this shocking use of extreme violence and like situations, and like the sex was a weapon, like bodies were like abused in ways that he didn't feel like mattered. Like there was no reason to do that kind of thing. And that he honestly just felt like it was gratuitous. However, unlike America's genre of similar films, like the torture porn like genre, which were made popular by films like Saw and Cabin Fever and Hostel, which we talked about in our torture porn episode. Well, Kat wasn't there, but in the torture porn episode, it was very much just like, this is just 'cause we can, right? And it's just like, this is kind of fun to make people squirm. With New French Extremity, it features film that use gore purposefully and with respect, like I said. So whereas Quant felt that this is a quote of him from this article that he wrote. He says, "Cinema suddenly determined to break every taboo, to wade in rivers of viscera and spumes of sperm, to fill each frame with fresh, nubile or gnarled, and subject it to all manner of penetration, mutilation, and defilement." Which is what I would say is exactly what torture porn is. Like, and what some films that we've encountered are that. And like, that is a type of film. But I would argue that a lot of the films that are qualified as being under the term New French Extremity are not just that.
Yeah, I feel like it's maybe they're put there and they shouldn't be necessarily put there.
Or I think what was really interesting about this term is that when he dubbed it, when he created it, it was like a diss. It was like how torture porn was a diss. Like people were like, that's torture porn, it's gross, right? But then there's like this revolution of like people taking back the term, right? So it became a thing where it was like, yeah, it is New French Extremity, it is extreme, but it's our New French Extremity. Like it's actually not what you said. It's this. Like, in the same thing with torture porn, where, like, Eli Roth and all of the, like, James Wan have been like, yeah, it is torture porn. And honestly, that's kind of cool for us. Like, you know? So, with the films that we're going to explore in our film section, you'll find that the torture porn aspect isn't really the case. The New French Extremity films are more like the intellectual sibling to America's torture porn, where these are not violent films, but rather films about violence and its larger impact on the world around it. These films are unabashedly French, and they harbor the pain, trauma, and the survival that only France can truly encapsulate.
Yeah.
You know, like, we can view it, and there's still like a disconnect. Like, we will never understand. The same thing with like the Japanese films was like, I can watch those films a million times, but I will never honestly get the real impact of them because I do not have that cultural background. I do not know. I didn't grow up hearing those stories and believing in those things and having that same spiritual like guide, like in feeling. And the same thing with France films, like with New French Extremity. It's like, I'll never 100% be able to come at it like
because we haven't experienced it. Like we live a very luckily sheltered existence here in America and have not witnessed war on our soil, and it definitely impacted our ability to process this kind of media correctly.
And like, so director Alexander Aja, he was the one who directed High Tension, which we will touch upon in our film section. He embraced the genre and is like one of the first that was like, yeah, we are that. And what he had to say about the genre was, the problem with the French is that they don't trust their language when it comes to horror. American horror movies do well, but in their own language. The French aren't interested. It's essentially that all of a sudden, the perceived polish of austerity had been removed, with new and established French filmmakers getting their hands dirty. So it's like, he is saying like, French like don't trust to be scared or to do that, right? There's like this, with there being censorship and with their trying to ignore like what is the reality of it, it's hard for them to then watch something that is a direct like explanation of this, right? It's just like throwing it back in their face.
Yeah.
So like French filmmakers were so well known for like making art and making this like beautiful piece that very naturally impacts the environment, and to take something and be like, this is a brutal history we have, it's honestly different and like challenging for them. So he says that horror shows us what we are afraid of, and French extremity films show what the French are afraid of themselves.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of it, right? Like yeah, snaps from that guy, right?
Yeah.
With Japan, it's like the spirits like that are lingering here and are unresolved because there is no resolution. That's not the point, right? With this, it's like it's not going to go away. And at some point, we got to look in the mirror. New French Extremity is a movement that sees art house and genre directors converge to meditate on the most horrific aspects of life, and what remains after those social veneers are stripped away, like, is essentially the reality, right? Like, we've taken off this mask and you see the real face, right? It's like with the protagonist of Eyes Without a Face looking in the mirror. This face that we put on is not ours. It is a direct history of what we've been through. So it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like what the cult in Martyrs believes, which is that once we've given into the reality and accepted our fate, we can ingest this genre with a full understanding, like pretty much like they wanted. It's a spiritual awakening into the mindset and emotional distress of an entire nation, right? You're like becoming a martyr for this trauma, right? It's just like at some point when you're watching that and you're watching the torture of that film, you just like, you accept it at some point, and then you're just there. And that's kind of what I think that a lot of the goals are.
Yeah,
it's like we're going to traumatize you into being numb. Because like right now you're pretending it's not there. We want you to feel it so much that you stop. Like you're confronted with it.
Well, yeah, it's in that you're confronted with it so that you can finally just like accept that that's what happened and move on.
Yeah.
But like in a healthy way.
Yeah.
That's not pretending it didn't happen.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's how everyone does it, but I can understand that, like, the Holocaust was really bad.
Yeah.
The Algerian wars were really bad. It's hard to accept that that was not that long ago, you know? And I could definitely see how it would bring a lot of conflict internally and otherwise across an entire nation of people. This is not surprise me at all, and it's just very interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's really great for horror to get an opportunity to say those things and
this
to turn.
This is why we learn.
This is why we learn, and like to turn that. I love the fact that it was such a negative turn, and they turned it on it. You know, that they were like, "Here's a term, and it means that you guys are gross," and they were like, "Actually, we're all gross, and we love it."
We're all gross.
And you should learn from us. And we're actually, I really like the phrase that it's the intellectual sibling to America's torture porn.
And I would agree 100%.
Yeah, Eli, love you, but have you watched this? Okay.
Yeah, films. We watched some films. Now let's talk about those films. And all that spooky stuff.
So we watched stuff.
We did. We always do that. Look at us be.
Yeah. And this stuff, it was French stuff. Because, well, we already told you why. I felt like it would be kind of cool to start with something that's modern. Although New French Extremity is incredibly modern, with Martyrs being from 2008. So there's not like...
The farthest back we go is 2003 in this episode. We
Yeah,
mentioned the one from the 60s.
Yeah.
And there's one from 48 that was also by the same guy.
But those weren't New French Extremity.
Yeah,
they
it
were
was just like the
films.
precursor. Yeah.
They influenced these. Yeah. So it's like New French Extremity is honestly new, right? And it's it's pretty interesting, right? So the most recent one that I can think of was from 2016. I did reference it once, only in that it is a female director, which was really cool. And it has been renowned as like a really impactful film. And it was like, I think because American audiences were like, whoa, what is this? I'm so uncomfortable. I'm going to leave the theater to throw up. Whereas like French audiences are like, I've seen High Tension. This is nothing. You know? So what we watched was Raw.
Yes.
From 2016. So what is Raw about? So stringent vegetarian Justine encounters a decadent, merciless, and dangerously seductive world during her first week at veterinary school. Desperate to fit in, she strays from her principles and eats raw meat for the first time. First off, gross. The young woman soon experiences terrible and unexpected consequences as her true self begins to emerge. That's what happens when you eat meat, cat.
Okay. Well, what it says is a well-earned 91% on Rotten Tomatoes.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's directed by Julia DeCarno. I hope I'm saying your name right, Julia. You did a really great job.
Yeah, it was a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
All of these movies, I mean, we'll talk about High Tension, but did it just like 90% of it excellent across the board.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what's great about this is that it is continuing to carry the torch that is New French Extremity, right? It's keeping it alive. Another thing about this film is that there is a lot of violence or not violence. There's a lot of graphic like gore and body horror. There's a lot of body horror, like with her having a rash and when she's like scratching at it. It's so long. Like a lot of the things are drawn out and make like with the purpose of making the viewers feel very uncomfortable, but none of it is like without reason.
Yeah.
You know, like you're supposed to feel that because you're identifying with this character who is clearly going through something.
Yeah.
And I would honestly argue that it is a coming of age film. In itself.
I would agree.
Yeah. Because she's like this virginal and delicate protagonist that we're following, right? And she's confronted with what could be interpreted loosely as puberty, her new sexual awakening, because she's like very clear and pure before she doesn't do anything until she gets here, and she's very lost to the point where like we have the beginning where she's lost. She doesn't have any kind of provocative clothing. Like, and that's made a point because they're like hazing them. And there's like one where it was like, you're supposed to be wearing party clothes. She had to go to her older sister to get anything remotely party clothes. Right.
And even the dress that she picks is like not in any way really like especially sexy. Yeah.
And even that dress is like the only thing she has. So every time she's trying to be sexy, she's in that dress. And so like by the end, when like towards the end where she's like slowly spiraling out, she's in that dress and she's like in the mirror and she's putting on like lipstick and she's dancing really seductively. And which is really important is that she's listening to a song where it's female singers who are singing about men in the way that usually men are singing about women. So they're like objectifying men and just essentially treating them as if they were just objects. And she's like dancing all like sexually, but really intense, like in the mirror. But it's like, take that and compare it to her coming in and she's like got her like hoodie on and she just wants to learn. And like her older sister is just like the biggest jerk. And it's just like, what are you going to do to being that like
fierce kind of like,
yeah, like, I'm going to figure myself out.
Scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sexy but lady.
Yeah. And I would even say there's a bit of like experimentation with drugs that are referenced. Like she's not doing drugs, but a lot of the things that she does and the way that she behaves would kind of make you like believe that like she would be doing drugs, right? Like her rash that she gets, which is really upsetting, could symbolize like acne, right? And she's like, oh, it's so bad. She's like scratching it first and like scratching it, like digging in there for so long to the point where you're just like, I want to die. The blood that we see a lot is reminiscent of menstrual times. And then she is very clearly going through withdrawals quite a bit throughout this film because she's trying like not to do things. Yeah, she's like shivering and like, she's all like twitchy and like is being tortured by other people. But it's also like, I think, a representation of her own torture inside.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's just nice that all the violence is definitely plot driven instead of just like there just cuz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is a graphic, it is very graphic, which is what all these films we're going to talk about are. They definitely had people who left the theater, and it was reported as being really gross. I can handle pretty much all gore. I did feel really uncomfortable. There's a scene where she is eating, spoiler alerts, eating her sister's finger that has come off.
Yeah, I literally covered my face with my shirt.
Like, I was definitely
freaking
peeking
out.
through my fingers.
But yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that. At Gutenberg, or Gothenburg Film Festival, several attendants in the audience fainted and vomited.
Ugh.
Over 30 people left the cinema prematurely, and they had to take a break in the middle of the movie due to all the turmoil.
That's just crazy. Yeah. And it's like, well, one, as I'm a vegetarian. So for me, I was like, this sucks. This is like the worst. She's like eating raw chicken. It's so much, but it's like really like this transformative story, right? She's like, she was someone who was very clearly sheltered. And honestly, it's like a really good representation of like your first year at college. Like you're trying to be cool, you're trying to fit in, you're dealing with all of this stress, which is then causing all kinds of trauma to your body. And it also had like a lot of familial like trauma that was in there. Like it's very clear that her parents aren't very emotional or supportive. Like it's not until the end where they're like, oh yeah, we kind of knew this would happen to you. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like
it's really
no support.
The end is where I'm like honestly most thinking that this actually ties very much into like all the history stuff that we said. Because essentially at the end, spoilers, if you want us to ruin it, go away now.
Go away.
Then come back in like 5 minutes. So essentially the dad tells her we let her be too much of herself, like herself.
Yeah.
And then I'm just like, yo, that's like the French people doing messed up stuff.
Yeah.
Just being what like is perceived as the monstrous versions of themselves.
And literally like,
and then she had hope, I guess, of figuring it out.
Yeah.
Because she had like accepted it, but like hadn't done anything too bad yet.
Yeah.
You know what
and she
I mean?
still didn't. Like it was her sister who was bad. Which again, because no one did anything. It's this whole thing of like being hush hush about
like they didn't
what
talk
is this
about
problem.
it. They just like let her figure it out to her own devices without any like emotional support or like talking through it. And like the dad even says, he's like, you know, it was our fault. We just let her do whatever she needed to do, I guess.
Yeah.
And we knew it was gonna like get her.
Yeah.
And you know, but you'll probably be okay because one, you've like learned from seeing what happened to her.
Yeah.
But also like look at me and your mom. She tried to eat me and we're totally cool.
Yeah. And that's what's crazy about it, right? It's like they're just living with the fact that their mom's crazy. Like they're essentially like, I would interpret them as being rougarous and that they have to like consume of human flesh, but it's like not a like, or they'll like die, like they get sick, right? So, and it's not until they have the first bite that it causes that. So they're like 100% a rougarou. But yeah, it's like your dad has these scars. It's like you never went to the beach. Also,
There's lots of beaches in France.
Yeah, and then there's like,
There's a whole city that's a
nude
spa
beaches
city.
and stuff. And so, but then the mom had it and just like never. And like they never feel like an alert when the fact that the sister's like finger was cut off and they went to, yeah, it's a weird thing. But I think that is a bit of like we don't talk about that stuff.
Like
right?
not accepting like what's perceived as like the monstrous side of us and all that fun.
But we watched other films.
We sure did.
So we also watched Martyrs, which is like the quintessential new French extremity film. Like it's the one that pops up all the time.
It's the one like, see this.
Yeah.
Like we watched Just High Tension and Raw. We're like, wait a minute, no, we have to watch Martyrs.
Yeah.
And we had to like go through great lengths.
Yeah, we
to
were
achieve that
tortured
goal.
to get to this film. It was trauma.
We were redirected to so many inappropriate sites that still haunt me.
If anyone wants to buy this movie for us, we'll take it.
It was like $16.
Like, we're not paying for it. Like, and you couldn't rent it. It wasn't like, oh, let's rent it from Amazon for $2 thing. It was like, you buy this thing for $17 or you're out. And we're like, listen, We don't have ads in this podcast. But Martyrs is actually, like, the director is actually influenced by Hostel. So there is, like, a direct relation to torture porn, but it's still, like, the intellectual, like, sister to it. Being like, well, I studied, and this is what it should do. So, Kat, why don't you tell us about what Martyrs is?
Yeah, so Martyrs is a young woman's quest for revenge against the people who kidnapped and tormented her as a child, and it leads her and her friend, who is also a victim of child abuse, on a terrifying journey into the living hell of depravity. So essentially, Pascal Lagier, I think that's how you would say his name,
I believe you.
really just dives right in to, honestly, reminiscent of what Eyes Without a Face was trying to do too, in terms of, like, the historical context.
Yeah.
There's so much Holocaust imagery and, like, situations. You have a lot of emaciated bodies, like, images, pictures, the torture of, like, from government and high organizations. That, again, the theme of, like
science,
military, science-based experiment that is just torture. That's, like, not seeing humans as humans and, like, really just doing awful stuff. And the loss of individuality, or this, like, split sense of self. And just, like, a lot of, like, graphic, like, shaving of the head. Like, just, like, honestly creating what you would find if you were going into a concentration camp and finding people still there.
100%.
It's very reminiscent of, like, the pictures and the, like, documentation of that.
Yeah. And it featured a lot of, like, different people who experienced trauma differently. Like, and that was, like, a statement, right? It was, like, some people, like, are, like, hallucinate. Right. And then, like, some people internalize the guilt, and then it becomes nightmares that become too real. And then you end up hurting yourself. Right. Like the main character literally just had, like, severe depression because of, like, the trauma that she endured. And it was just, like, emphasized for horror. Right. Like,
yeah.
she was definitely hurting herself.
The theme was mostly that, like, through not accepting the horror of what happened to her, like the fear and all that she did not reach transcendence because she didn't go outside of herself.
Yeah. And she had survivor's guilt, which is a big
lots
thing.
of survivor's guilt. Guilt is such a theme. Redemption and guilt. French Extremities, it's all up in there all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's also the connection to, like, torture of undesirables that you see, like, in the Holocaust, of people being taken because they fit a certain category. So specifically, the main characters are both lesbians. That was one of the categories that Hitler decided was, like, we murder them now, as well as, like, just not white.
Yeah.
So the one actress was Eurasian and Moroccan. So the fact that they're clearly just, like, not of the Aryan times, and, like, the people who are tormenting them are a bunch of old white people, and they're being kidnapped and tortured for science. But yeah, not nearly as gory as the wounds would have suggested. This is because the film is not here for gore and violence. There's a message.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't you tell us about the connections in that?
Yeah, so interestingly, consciously or not, director Pascal Lagier has invoked Charles de Gaulle's quote from the film's title, Martyrs. So essentially, when the war ended and France was like, independence, yeah. De Gaulle, who usurped Pétain, made this famous speech. It's referencing the period of time where the trauma and post-traumatic culture really started to take place. So after liberation, he claimed Paris humiliated, Paris broken, Paris martyrized, but Paris liberated by itself, by its own people, with the help of its armies of France, with the support and aid of France as a whole, of fighting France, of the only France, of true France, of eternal France. So in there you get France martyrized.
You get France.
But Paris liberated. So you've been martyrized, but you were liberated from that.
Yeah. Like
martyring.
that's, yeah.
Like,
you've risen from the ashes.
You've transcended.
Yeah. You are a phoenix.
Yeah.
And that's, like, the whole thing, right? And it's a very long film that takes a lot of points. Like, there's a lot of, like, emotional roller coasters where you think you're done Like the first, like, honestly, like the first 5 minutes feels like one different kind of film. Then the next 10 minutes, it's like, what? It's over. Like, what? We just did so. We just murdered a whole family.
It was like a whole
what is happening? And then it's
time.
like, okay, it's this person traumatized, and it was like psych, and then it was like psych again, and then it was like psych again, with a lot of that making like there's like cults involved, there's weird twists and stuff, but it was yeah, it was a lot, but in like a good way.
And we can't get into all of it. So one thing I would recommend for the listeners, if they're like really down to keep checking this stuff out, is to check out offscreen.com, Martyrs Evoking France's Cinematic and Historical Past. There's so much stuff that I was unable to say in this episode just because of time that talks about, one, this movie and its connection to history, but also its connection to the like emergence of like talking about this issue of like trauma and torture and all of that stuff throughout French's history. So check it out if you have time, or the book that I read, which I'll tell you at the end. But that's all I got for Martyrs.
Cool.
It was a really great movie.
Third one, which we'll just talk about briefly because it doesn't fully, like, it fits in that it is New French Extremity, but I would not argue that it is an intellectual sibling. The film is High Tension from 2003. This film is about best friends Marie and Alexia, who decide to spend a quiet weekend at Alexia's parents' secluded farmhouse. But on the night of their arrival, ironically, the girls' idyllic getaway turns into an endless night of horror. Yeah. It is directed by Alexander Aja, which had that cool quote about kind of like taking back the term, essentially being like, no. You know, it's like, yeah, it is a lot, but it's a lot on purpose, and it's not for nothing. And French people just need to deal with it. Was apparently what he was like essentially saying.
And if you look at it in the context of like this idea of having a monstrous identity that we're trying to hide or unaware of, it does that.
Yeah.
I mean, no one liked the ending, but that is what the ending does say.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about it in that context.
Yeah.
Was it done in a way where you're like, cool, I wanted that?
Nope.
No. But if we're really thinking of it in the context of, hey, France has this like problem with identity and the fact that we're burying one of us, the bad side of us, the monstrous side of us, and not that's so horrible that we can't even look at it. Mm-hmm. It does that.
Yeah.
Undeniably.
Yeah.
Just wanted it to be different. That's kind of,
yeah.
Because it could have stood on its own as a slasher film and it would have been really great. But I think because it's French, I feel that's why.
Yeah.
I would argue that's why. I don't know. I'm not there.
Yeah.
But
And I think there was a need to make it more, right? Because honestly, when you get before so there's a twist at the end. So spoilers. You can just skip this whole
big
part.
spoilers. Like you
big
can't even
spoilers.
watch the movie if you know the spoiler.
Because you're going to be really agitated because it doesn't add up. And I know that because it was spoiled for me, then we watched it, and I was like, this doesn't make sense. But the big spoiler is that there isn't an assailant that is murdering viciously. It is actually Marie, who, I guess because of her intense emotional feelings for her friend, is the murderer. And this whole time, it's been that, like, switcheroo. Like, psych, it's actually been me the whole time. Which has been done in horror films before and done well. With this, it really felt like a slapped-on ending. To be like, oh, no, it means something. But before you get to the last, like, 10 minutes of that film, it is a decent slasher fic. It's like very gory. But it's also very interesting in what the gore is happening. And, like, I did enjoy Marie's character up until then. Because it was, like, the survival thing. Like, it was literally, like, you're next, right? Like, just someone doing really smart things in reference to, like, trying to survive. Which was really, really cool. And then it's like if they were trying to make this remark about sexuality and mental health and identity, it kind of falls short because it does feel like it was slapped on at the end. Like, it should have been something that was threaded through, and it kind of missed the mark.
Yeah, it seemed like it was just trying to really wrap that, like, maybe, like, I don't know, I'm not this guy, but, like, wrap that historical context in and just be creative, but, like, didn't set it up throughout the entire film. So, as you said, it was just slapped on. Just being like, this is how I feel, but, like, also I could have, like, meshed it in there a little bit.
But it was also made just for fun, too, as well. And I think that's what we're also missing with New French Extremity is that it's also there to have fun the way that torture porn has fun.
Your feelings. Your feelings. Yeah, I said feelings. Let's talk about feelings. Okay. And all that spooky stuff. I love spooky stuff.
So we're going to rate how we feel. So it's if you like it, it's martyrdom. Because that's what we want to achieve.
I'm a survivor.
I'm a martyr.
Yep.
That's how it went. And then if you don't like it, it's raw chicken liver, because that's what that poor actress had to like nibble on for the scene in Raw.
Straight vomit everywhere.
There's so much like just really gross things with raw things. Like there's a part where she's eating a raw chicken. She's actually not eating a raw chicken.
It's just
it was sugar.
It's just straight sugar.
So now she can't like eat sugar anymore. But honestly, like if you weren't a vegetarian going in to shoot this film, like as an actress,
I feel like you would
how
come
are
out
you
of it
not
strong
anymore? Yeah.
Vegetarian now. 100% vegetarian, please.
Yeah.
Now.
I do not want to touch meat or see it. Like after you have to pretend you eat a finger. So for the genre of French horror, not even just New French Extremity, but French horror.
I'm a survivor. I'm a martyr. It was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoy it now significantly more after like doing all the research. I'm just like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
This is like so much like, there's so many reasons why.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much identity there. It's like, it's beautiful. It made me really, I feel so satisfied now after learning all that historical context to be like, yo, this was smart.
Things matter.
They're smart, guys. Did you know that they're smart? Their films are so smart. It's not just cuz.
America,
it's not dumb.
what are you doing? Yeah.
It's like every single piece has a reason. That's just so cool.
Yeah.
I like it when stuff's intentional. Like, if you're going to do it, do it.
Yeah. Like, yeah, we get into so many heated arguments where it's, like, not us, but, like, us to other people where it's just, like, everything you do means something. So at least do it on purpose, right?
Yeah, and, like own
actually
it, you know?
Yeah. I would say, so for me, it is definitely, I'm a witch, I'm a lover, I'm a child, I'm a martyr.
I enjoy the music we're making about this.
Okay. Because I really enjoy, I've always enjoyed even just like gore films, like even just torture porn. Like I watched House of Wax like a million times.
Paris Hilton.
Yeah.
Actually, like, doing a thing. It was cool.
She did pretty well. I literally watched that so many times. I actually really like
that movie.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with what we're talking about, other than the fact it's real gory. But, like, yeah, no, I like that film. That's fun.
Yeah. And, like, I can watch gore and usually, like, eat food and be fine.
I can't.
I can definitely do
I can eat, like, after. I can't eat, like, while it's happening. I mean, like, is it now? Because I'm going to wait.
Yeah,
a few minutes because I don't want to feel gross while eating.
Yeah, I know. I can disassociate, I guess, really well. So, and with torture porn, that's what I always just enjoyed. I was like, this is just a fun... The event is happening. So I've always really enjoyed torture porn, and I enjoy New French Extremity in a different way. Like, I don't really lump them in the same... Like, I can still feel myself going and watching Hostel, enjoying for what it is, which is just, like... literally just gratuitous violence, right? But I like watching these and being like, hey, this isn't as gory as it really should be given like the events that are happening. Like with Martyrs, there was not enough blood for like the events that were occurring. And I thought it was really interesting because like usually it's just like buckets full of blood that are happening like for no reason. And it's like for this to be gory, I will say the way that things are happening and the intensity of which they were happening, I was having a hard time eating my dinner when we were watching it. Yeah. Because I did try to eat.
I would say all of the films, like, definitely caught me for, like, moments of just, like, extreme uncomfortability. Like, where I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not upset, but I also don't feel like I'm, like, happy about this.
Yeah.
Like, that's one thing I'll say is really interesting. It's not entertaining in the same way torture porn is. Mm-hmm. Because it just feels like, oh, geez, I shouldn't be watching this. But also, like, I'm really happy I am because I feel like it's important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, it just wasn't, like, enjoyable in the, like, we're making fun of it and, like, putting it out there because why not?
Yeah, it's not
like,
as voyeuristic.
It wasn't like, yeah. and are arguably disrespectful
Yeah.
to like what the realities
Absolutely.
of gore and like murder and all of that stuff is. Like, it's not something you should be entertained by.
Yeah, and I think like something that
Arguably.
you had said when we were researching this was that when you look at the differences between American and French film, right, is that other countries and what we're going to see throughout the themes that we're going to be exploring for this month is that a lot of countries have experienced war and trauma on their soil physically. Like their homes have been on fire, their lives have been destroyed, like literally just like around them. Whereas America has been this like little oasis who just like, we go somewhere else to do that, right? And then people come back and they're traumatized and we can never truly understand them, right? So when we look at horror, we're desensitized and we have no real gauge for what the severity is of it, right? So it doesn't quite impact us and we can't really give it the respect that it deserves because we don't really know what that is, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like Francis is like, people can really see that and be like, yeah, that's like real. Like, this isn't just fun and games, America. This is a real thing. So,
Yeah, no, it was just like, I just feel like that's just so true because like we don't have the context. Like, unless you've gone to war or like witnessed a murder or like, you know, some people have seen those things.
Yeah.
And I would argue that maybe they're not loving the films that are gratuitous about it. Because it's like honestly disrespectful to the fact that like something
100%.
horrible has happened and we're entertained by that.
Like
And
all of true crime.
Like, what are we in ancient Greece watching all the people fight to the death? Like, no,
Yeah,
that's
Colosseum.
not what we should be doing, my friends. Like,
Yeah. Well,
so I liked how respectful it was. And I liked that I didn't like feel like it was for shock value. Or
there
just
are
like,
some shock value though. High Tension is full of that.
I know. I
Like,
agree,
there's literally
but it's still definitely very like, ooh.
Like he at the time, who comically when he's wearing the hat and he's like cloaked in shadow does
Looks
have a
just
weird
like Donald
appearance
Trump.
to look like Donald Trump. It's so weird. But he, the assailant in High Tension, like murderer, like takes the dad figure and he like puts his head through like the banister of the stairs, like so it's between like two poles, and then he like pushes this really heavy bookshelf and like rolls past and it just like cuts his head off, like it smushes his head off, which is like one of the first, that's the first murder we see. That is literally the first murder. Like, first it starts with, like, when he opens the door, the guy just, like, puts something right in his head. Like, I think it was, like, a hammer or something. The pointy part. And then, like, he, like, was, like, falling over. So there's blood everywhere. The mom gets, like, viciously murdered, and there's, like, spurts of blood everywhere. The girl's presumably raped. And then, like, the boy just gets, like, shot down. All spoilers. But it's like there's a lot of gratuity happening and it was like crazy. It was like fun because I was just like, what? Like when she like makes it look like she's not in the room, like she wasn't there. And then she hides under the bed and when he pulls it up, her like feet are tucked up so he doesn't know.
Yeah, that is beautiful. It was definitely like I would agree with you. High Tension doesn't do it in the same way that I would say Martyrs or Raw does.
Yeah.
But like as a whole of like the movies that I've seen, it seems purposeful. There is arguably one movie that I saw in college that I still don't remember the name of that haunts me to this day that has an extremely gratuitous rape scene and it's like very upsetting.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about that. I don't even think that falls under New French Extremities. I'm not sure. But if it does, I don't like that one. I'm not about it. No.
Yeah,
You
we're
see
not
a
gonna
guy's
watch the
face literally
palms
get
or whatever.
squished into nothingness and you witness like what I would say is like a 20-minute rape scene.
Gross. Yeah, we're not gonna watch that or the 29 Palms that infuriated James Quant. But that's been our French horror episode.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
We like it. It's the martyr time for us.
Let's get historical and smarts and all this stuff with the education with us, with friends, and what's up.
Yeah. Join us next week. We're going to talk about K-horror, Korean horror. So don't get married.
Vote your kids.
Okay, bye.